Welcome to Let's Just Talk. I'm your host, Hami. With the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime, his asylum in Russia, and Damascus now under the control of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, also known as al-Nusra, the Middle East faces a seismic shift. Here to help us unpack what this means for the region and the world is Ambassador Chas Freeman. Ambassador Freeman is one of the United States' most distinguished diplomats. Ambassador Freeman is a veteran American foreign policy expert, and he served as the United States ambassador to Saudi Arabia during the Gulf War and was a key figure in pivotal moments like President Nixon's historic 1972 visit to China. Ambassador Freeman, welcome to Let's Just Talk.
Amy, good to be with you. I think if you want to understand what's happening in Syria, you first have to recognize that Syria has been a cockpit of great power or greater power rivalry for its entire independent existence. It was originally carved out along with Lebanon by French colonialism. It is a creation of that. The city of Aleppo, which was the first major urban area to be taken by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, is largely French-speaking for that reason. But every one of Syria's neighbors has had its claws in the political fabric of Syria. For the Turks, it is a problem first of all, historically, because it has a significant Kurdish population, which is sympathetic to and linked in the Turkish view to the PKK, a terrorist Turkish Kurdish party, which is anathema to the Turks. But more recently, of course, Syria having been basically vivisected by the United States and Gulf Arab countries, Israel, Turkey itself, and Iran, has become the source of about 5 million refugees in Turkey, and the Turks are desperate to have them go home. So the Turks have been working very hard, apparently, with the victors in this latest move on the Syrian chessboard to create an effective fighting force, an effective government, which ruled in Idlib, the region in the north of Syria. And they obviously, on top of this, recently President Erdogan of Turkey had been trying to persuade Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian leader, to make his peace with the jihadi groups, including Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and they were constantly rebuffed. The Russians, who came into Syria, have long had a relationship with the Syrian regime, basically as far back as the 1950s. The United States, for that reason, has intervened multiple occasions in Syrian politics, trying to overthrow the regime. It's regime change. Initially, that was intended to reduce communist and Soviet influence in Syria. More recently, it's been in pursuit of Israeli interests. And anyway, the Russians, too, had been trying to persuade Bashar al-Assad to make his peace with other Syrian factions and got nowhere. And I think both Turkey and Russia essentially just wrote him off. Their patience ran out. So his foreign supporters, Iran, Turkey, and Russia, were reduced to Iran. And of course, Iran has been crippled in terms of its regional influence by the Israeli decimation of Hezbollah, the Shiite Lebanese quasi-fascist militia movement. And Hezbollah, in fact, withdrew from Syria in response to Israeli attacks in Lebanon, having to concentrate on that. So that support for the regime also disappeared. And Iran did not have the capability to protect it against the insurgency we've just seen. Final point, I think, is that Israel, from the beginning, has wanted to fragment Syria. Syria is a mosaic of minorities. The Bashar al-Assad family are Alawite Muslims. This is a rather unique branch of Shiism, uh,
Mm-hmm.
not recognized by Iran as Shiite. The Syrian regime has always been secular under the Assad family, and although they favored the Alawites, there's been, for example, equality between men and women. Women serve in the armed forces, much as is the case in Israel. So
Mm-hmm.
the Israelis have an agenda of cutting off Lebanon, Hezbollah, from Iranian logistical support,
Mm-hmm.
and they've just succeeded.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's very hard to straighten out which foreign patron did what in this
Okay.
situation. Um, but the problem now, first of all, um, Israel has succeeded in driving Hamas underground in Gaza. It
Mm-hmm.
has not succeeded in destroying it. It has decimated Hezbollah. Of course, it decapitated its leadership with a terrorist act of using pagers and mobile phones as explosives, killing a lot of innocent Lebanese, including children, by doing that. Um, but it has essentially established its hegemony in the entire Levant now.
Mm-hmm.
And the big question is whether Abu Muhammed al-Julani, the leader of the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, will
Mm-hmm.
be able to hold Syria together, or whether it will fly apart,
Mm-hmm.
achieving the long-term Israeli objective of reducing it to multiple ethnic enclaves, all
Mm-hmm.
at war with each other. So we don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
But you used the word seismic in relation to the change in the region, meaning the Levant. I think that's correct. A final observation, and that is that now that Iran has been essentially deprived of its frontline partners,
Mm-hmm.
meaning Hamas and Hezbollah, in terms of their effective ability to join Iran in reprisal against Israel's attacks on Iran, Iran is now going to be under huge pressure
Mm-hmm.
from its own people to go ahead and develop the nuclear weapon it has not developed. And every intelligence service that has looked at this has concluded that Iran, in fact, did not have a bomb program. It had not made a decision to build a bomb. And mainly this is due to religious scruples. The Iranian position is that nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction are haram, they are forbidden in Islam. Now that is going to be under huge pressure to change. So this is really a major development in the region,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think its importance can be understated by any means. The Assad family went first to the United Arab Emirates, and then, as you mentioned, have taken a political asylum in Moscow. I think we're not going to hear much from them in the future.
Mm-hmm.
But there is that regime, I guess many people will say that it got what it deserved. It Bashar al-Assad inherited the position of president from his father, Hafez al-Assad.
Mm-hmm.
He promised reform and change and liberalization, but he did not deliver that.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, over the course of his 13 years as the leader of Syria, he came to rely ever more on the security forces, which are known for their uh, brutality uh, and murderousness. And I think it would be fair to say that he remained in power not because anybody um, really supported him
Mm-hmm.
strongly, other than the Alawites whom he favored,
Mm-hmm.
but because everybody looked at him and they saw no viable alternative.
Right.
It seemed to be anyone who would be better. and they feared what might follow him, and I think that was correct. Now, this is the challenge for Mr. al-Julani.
Mhm.
Or actually, his name is Shara. His real name is Shara, Ahmed Hussein Shara. I think he now faces a real test, whether he can convince Syrians that his movement has sufficient tolerance and wisdom to lead the country toward peace
Mhm.
and reconstruction, because Syria has been virtually dynamited by the civil war that broke out in 2011.
Right.
So I think this is all very mysterious to people who haven't been paying attention to what was going on in Syria.
Mhm.
The tremendous suffering of the Syrian people may now have come to an end, or at least a break point, but we don't know.
We don't know. And hearing you explain this, I'm just thinking Syria just the subject of another geopolitical experiment by the superpowers, and that's the long tradition of colonial powers in these regions. I'm wondering if we can elaborate just a bit more on the various actors, their interest, and who is supporting them. And you've mentioned the United States, Israel, Russia, Iran, uh,
Turkey.
Turkey. And then because the frenzy on social media, at least between different factions, of course, a lot of people are joyous about the fall of the Assad regime, but a lot of people are like, this is just another Western NATO, Turkey, United States backed group that has come to, replace one horrible government with another puppet government that is going to do the bidding of the West. What do you make of that?
I don't agree with that thesis. I think what has been happening in West Asia generally,
Mm,
beginning with the Iranian Islamic Revolution and continuing to this day in various forms, has been the end of external
mm,
patronage direction and the emergence of indigenous forces or forces within the region
mm,
that determine the future of the countries there. I mentioned that big winner in all of this is Israel,
right.
which is, of course, part of the region, even if it behaves in a manner that causes everyone else in the region to reject it. But one major change I should have noted, and I didn't, is that in the previous efforts to overthrow the Assad government and produce regime change in Syria had
Mm,
strong backing from some Gulf Arab countries.
mm,
But more recently, beginning with the United Arab Emirates and continuing to Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, the Gulf Arabs had made their peace with the Assad government. They are no friends of Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda has its major objective is the overthrow of the monarchy in Saudi Arabia and the control of the holy sites Mecca and Medina,
mm,
and ultimately Jerusalem. Now, here is another factor that I should have mentioned, and that is it appears that Mr. al-Julani, who is 42 years old, he's a relatively young, vigorous man, has promised Israel that he will establish diplomatic relations with it.
mm,
But at the same time, he's told his followers that they will go on to liberate Jerusalem. So there is a bit of a contradiction there. What it suggests is that Israel was heavily involved in backing this group, and probably the CIA too. And there's an interesting contradiction because there is a $10 million bonus on the head of Mr. al-Julani, Mr. Shadra, I suppose he's now called, um, and at the same time the CIA, which has a long history of working with Islamist terrorist groups, for example, in Afghanistan against the Soviet occupation,
mm,
has apparently, done this again. So this has empowered Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, but I don't think it's anybody's fool. or anybody's puppet. And that is one reason that this moment is so very interesting. We don't know what that movement is going to do now that it has seized power in Damascus.
Mm.
So I think this is a different case. Let me make another point here in terms of American policy, since we're in the United States and talking largely, I suppose, to Americans. The United States, the Biden administration, leaves behind it a shambles in foreign policy.
Yeah.
There is a war in Ukraine that is a forever war. Mr. Trump has promised to end it in 24 hours, but I don't think there's any Gordian knot to be cut in Ukraine. There are very complex issues there, centering on initially the rights of minorities, Russian-speaking minorities, Hungarian-speaking minorities, Romanian-speaking minorities, whom ultranationalist Ukrainians sought to deprive of the right to use their own language to educate their children or communicate with local government. That set off a rebellion, which the Russians backed in the East. And that issue of minority rights remains unresolved, despite the annexation by Russia of 4 oblasts, 4 districts in eastern and southern Ukraine. That's one issue. The second issue is, of course, where is the border between Russia and Ukraine? That has to be worked out between Ukraine and Russia. Others cannot do that for them. And so there needs to be a negotiation. And Mr. Zelensky, who's the president, still unconstitutionally, but retains power as president in Kyiv, his term having run out, but he did not hold elections. So anyway, he is in power, and he has issued a decree saying that there can be no negotiation with Russia. And one of the Russian demands is that he repeal that decree, and so that a negotiation can take place. And the third and a much larger question is, what is the relationship of Ukraine to European security? And what is the architecture for European security? This all began in December 2021, when the Russians issued an ultimatum demanding that all 3 of these issues be addressed. That is, the issue of minority rights in Ukraine, the issue of the border and how that should be handled, and the issue of European security architecture. They were seeking an architecture for European security that would reassure them, but also reassure Western Europeans. And this remains on the table, but we have no negotiations going on. And the Russians are basically winning the war very decisively. And I don't think they want a ceasefire. They want a peace. So that is a mess, and it has distracted the United States. But we also have the distractions in West Asia, which we've been talking about: genocide in Gaza, ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, a war of invasion and annexation in Lebanon, Israeli territorial expansion, the issue of which way Syria is going to go, the future of Lebanon as a separate political entity, and so forth. And finally, as if this weren't enough, we are drifting slowly toward war in the Taiwan Strait. There is no diplomacy. You originally proposed to talk about diplomacy on this program before things happened, and we shifted to current events. Diplomacy is the best way of managing threats. It's cheap. It doesn't involve anybody dying for the most part. And it can be decisive. But there is no diplomacy in any of these situations. The United States may not want to have Israel attack Iran, as it proposes to do, or to be dragged into such a war, but we have no diplomatic contact to speak of with Iran. We're not engaged in dialogue. The agreement we reached to cap the Iranian nuclear program below the level of bomb building was repudiated by the previous Trump administration, and there's no understanding on that. In Ukraine, Secretary of State Antony Blinken has now been in office for 4 years. He has never once visited Moscow. The last time Sergei Lavrov, the very able Russian foreign minister, visited Washington was 5 years ago. There has been no dialogue. There have been, 10-minute or 5-minute encounters on the margins of international conferences, but these don't amount to anything.
Yeah.
And finally, there's no dialogue with China. There is two sides basically exchange combative talking points, but don't listen to each other. And nobody is really trying to solve any of the problems. The Taiwan issue, the issue of order in West Asia, or the issue of European security.
Mm-hmm.
So Mr. Trump and his crew are going to have their work cut out for them. Whether they're up to the job or not is something we will see.
That was a lot to unpack. And I I failed to see how all of the reason I wanted to talk to you about diplomacy originally is because I failed to see how all of these flare ups, how all of these fires here, over there, is securitizing our global system in any kind of way or securing American interests in any kind of way, besides, enriching the pockets of a few in the military industrial complex, and advancing the personal goals of certain politicians. But beyond that, I'm astonished that these people are the best that our systems can produce, and these are the people running our world and our politics. But I want to touch a bit on what this means for Lebanon and Gaza and the Palestinian cause, uh, uh, because I read some articles that were saying that Syria was the lifeline for resistance groups in Lebanon and in Gaza, as Iran used those routes to send weapons to the groups that it was supporting, namely Hezbollah and Hamas. And I'm wondering if uh, what you make of this, of what these articles are saying.
Well, that too is a lot to unpack. Obviously, the various resistance movements, this whole active one, and now unharmed is the government, the Ansar
The Houthis.
and the Houthis in Yemen. Um, I don't think the supply lines to Gaza and Hamas ran through Lebanon, but or Syria. But in any event, Hamas is basically on life support in Gaza, as Israel deliberately starves the bulk of the Palestinian population to death there when it doesn't kill them with drone sniping and bombs, supplied, unfortunately, by the United States. Um, I think the outcome in Lebanon is very uncertain. Clearly, Israel agreed to a kind of phony ceasefire in southern Lebanon because it was being mauled by Hezbollah. It ran into very serious resistance, and it was taking a level of casualties that it found unsustainable. But the ceasefire is essentially phony. That is, there have been over 120 Israeli violations of it in the short time it has technically been in effect. Hezbollah is clearly regrouping and attempting to revive itself from the terrible blows that Israel struck at it. That will be very complicated now that Syria is in the hands of Salafi Sunni government that is anti-Iranian, which is, of course, the case. So the cooperation with Iran is not likely to be great. On the other hand, there is, of course, the example of Hamas, which is Sunni, and nevertheless had a close relationship with Iran, a strongly Shiite movement and government. So we can't be sure what will happen again. We don't know whether geopolitical realpolitik will overcome religious divisions in the relationship between Syria and Iran. I want to go back, however, to the beginning of your comment and question. I think it's also the case that these foreign policy crises, and they are crises, and several of them have the capacity to go nuclear, which
Yeah.
is pretty frightening. Whether Iran acquires a nuclear weapon or not, that is a possibility in the conflict over Ukraine. It is certainly a possibility in the Taiwan Strait. Um,
Yes.
but in the middle of all of this, the United States, our country, is going through a constitutional crisis
Yeah.
on multiple levels. We have our democracy has been deeply eroded and transformed in many respects into a plutocracy
Mm.
ruled by the wealthy. Not all of whom are in the armaments business, but the concentration of wealth in our country and the emergence of monopolies and oligopolies, much as Karl Marx predicted, is really quite striking.
Yeah.
The disgruntlement of the people in general, the dissatisfaction of ordinary Americans with this produced the election of Donald Trump,
Yeah.
and who promised to provide answers. Whether he can or can't is something we will find out.
Yeah.
But we see the collapse in many respects of the rule of law, which is based on the Anglo-Saxon notion of due process.
Yeah.
Due process means that the outcome of a decision-making process is legitimized by the process, not by the outcome. In other words, you can have a bad outcome from the point of view of popular opinion, but if it was arrived at by fair procedures, it must be accepted as legitimate. So we have an election, and if the election is fair, as it was in 2020, and it is rejected by people now, despite being fair, that is a rejection of due process. The same is true of rejection of court decisions. Now we have a convicted felon as president who has just appointed another convicted felon as ambassador to France. This is nepotism, but interestingly, normal diplomatic procedure is that you do not appoint someone without first asking for uh, uh, the host country, in this case France, for whether they can accept this person or not.
Yeah.
That is a process called agrément, the French word for agreement, and a specialized diplomatic term. Obviously, Mr. Trump, who's not in office and not in a position to actually nominate anyone, by naming Charles Kushner as ambassador to Paris, has violated every procedural rule there is. So we're entering a period in which the very essence of our constitutional republic is deeply shaken and
Yeah.
arguably falling apart.
Yeah.
So we confront foreign crises, but we have one at home as well.
Yeah.
And you can see this, by the way. We don't know the precise motive of the assassination of the health insurance CEO that had just occurred. But many people suspect, and many actually applaud, his assassination on the grounds that they are being exploited by these insurance companies.
Yeah.
This is, yet another example of how the system is losing legitimacy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So can it regain it? We don't know.
And that's a serious question, and it's you can see it on both sides of the aisle as well. Even the Democrats held no primaries during these elections, which is an integral part of what our so-called democratic system is. So it's like it's happening on the right and it's happening on the left. And if there is no countervailing forces to this deteriorating conditions, there's no telling where we're going to end up.
Those
Um,
were those. Yeah, I'm not a fan of primaries because while they were well intentioned, they were invented in the 1920s. That is to provide a democratic means for party members to select a candidate
right.
for office. In fact, what has happened is that due to their very nature, plus other factors like gerrymandering, they have become a means of ensuring that extremists on both sides determine who is the candidate, and
Yeah.
they push our politics toward polarization. But having said that, you're quite right. What we had recently was not a democratic selection process, but coronations in each party. The incumbent, Mr. Biden, who was clearly not up to the job, nonetheless crowned himself, rather like Napoleon, as emperor, putting the crown
Sleepy
on his
emperor.
head. Well, yeah. And then on the other side, the second coming of Donald Trump was a similar process. And all of this fueled by the aforesaid plutocrats, malefactors of great wealth, as Franklin Delano Roosevelt termed them. So this is a crisis domestically.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot on our hands, and I hope there are more Ambassador Freemans out there who will come into these administrations, but I doubt that they want to hear voices like yours in the upcoming administration. But hopefully cooler heads prevail in all these
I'm quite
scenarios.
sure they have no interest in anything I say.
Yeah.
But I thank you for the opportunity to say it. And
Well,
perhaps this is the moment to close the conversation and look forward to another one in the future.
absolutely, absolutely. I will close it here, and I look forward to continuing these conversations with you. Thank you so much for espousing a lot of knowledge on us today.
Thank you, Hami.